Start our thread and the material rolls right up on top of the hook shank, and as I pull back with my left hand and wrap with my right, the material stays right on top of the hook shank. Before I let go of the tails, I just kind of flip them up a little bit. And if they don't quite spread, just come in with your index finger and kind of run your finger through there, and it kind of splays them out. And it just makes it a lot easier to separate them into two equal groups. Here again, I'm going to come down underneath. And you can see how I'm pulling on the tails towards me. Take a lock wrap of thread. Get those off to the side a little bit better. Now come back down on the side away from you. Kind of pull. Do another lock wrap of thread. That way those tails are never going to come together. And remember, don't cut off your excess yet. For the body, this time we're going to use a goose biot. In this particular one, we're going to be tying it in a pale morning dun color, so we're using a PMD biot. The nice thing about the goose biot is you can notice a little notch on one side. Now, if I was to tie this in tip first and wrap it forward with the notch to my left here, I'd have a nice smooth body with segmentation. If I flip it over and have the notch on the right-hand side and wrap it forward, I'll have that little ostrich rib, just like we did on the emerger using the turkey biot. For almost all my dry flies, I prefer to have it with the smooth body, though. And another little thing about goose biots is they tend to be a little bit more brittle than the turkey, so they require some moisture. To do that, you can peel off several fibers and lay them on a moist towel, or to speed things up, you can just stick one in your mouth like I'm about to do, and then tie it in tip first. As I tied this in tip first, I tied on the side towards me, and that little notch we talked about is going to be to my right. Another thing about goose biots, like I mentioned on the emerger, they tend to be a little bit shorter. So instead of wrapping this by my hand, I'm going to have to use a pair of hackle pliers. So we attach our hackle pliers, and we just wrap this forward. And as I wrap it forward, I'm kind of covering up that little fuzzy rib with each wrap, just until I get up to the thorax area and tie it off. Take a couple turns of thread, and we just make sure it's tied in there real good. And then we can cut off our excess. And we just want to make sure we have a smooth thorax area. And now we're ready for our post. And for the post, we're going to be using hen neck. For the hen neck, we're going to be using one of Whiting's hen necks, just because the tips of the feathers are nice and round. It just gives an overall better profile of a wing. As you can see from the natural lighting provided by this nice hot light, you can just see how round these feather tips actually are. Now, before we tie them in, we're going to flip them around here and put them shiny side together. That way, we have a nice V in there. So we're going to even them up there and bring it on up to the hook shank. And we're going to measure it for length. And the length is going to be the length of the hook shank. So I just hold them on there. Then I come in and just snip it just a hair longer than the hook eye. Then remove all the excess. And we're going to mount these right in the middle of the thorax. Just take a few turns of thread. Make sure it's nice and smooth in there. And then since we're going to need a post for a parachute, we're going to take a couple turns on the back side. And that way the wings stand straight up. Now before we tie in our hackle, what we're going to do is add a little dubbing just to place behind the wings. And since I had mentioned we're doing this in a PMD color, we're going to use the microfine dry fly dubbing in the PMD color. PMDs come in kind of a olive yellow color or a yellow olive color. This one we're going to use the olive yellow color. It may not seem like a big thing to most, but when out on the river, that little shade of color can make all the difference between a successful day or not. So we'll just put a little dubbing on here. And we'll wrap behind the wing a little bit here, a little bit right in front. What we're doing is just kind of building a thorax around those wings. Now that we have our dubbing down in our wings, we're ready for our hackle. For our hackle, what we're going to be using is another PMD color, which is provided by Mr. Whiting. And this happens to be a saddle hackle, which makes it a lot easier for doing parachutes. That way, you don't have to pick up additional tools like hackle pliers just because the hackle is so long. Once we have the hackle in here, what we're going to do is add just a pinch more dubbing. And what this is going to be used for is kind of a base to wrap our parachute around. So what I'm going to do is take the dubbing right on up to the wing, and I'm going to wrap it right around the base of the wing. And the reason for that is that when we start to wrap the hackle around here, the hackle will have a little bit bigger base of material to grab into and not be quite so fragile. Now we have some dubbing at the base of the fly here, or the wings. And as I did that, you can kind of see how the wings twisted just a little bit, depending on which way you put your dubbing on. So if I put the dubbing on clockwise, and the wings twisted just a little bit that way, that means I'm going to take the hackle and wrap the opposite way. And what that does, it brings the wings right back into the right position. Just wrap your hackle around the base of it a few times. Bring it up to the hook eye, and we're ready to tie it off. Take a few turns. Make sure it's tied in there nice and tight. Then you take your nicely fine-tipped scissors, like these stone flies, snip out your hackle, and just build up a little bit of a head, and just to make sure, double sure that hackle's not going to come off. And then we're ready to finish it off. So we finish it a few times here. And then we're ready to cut off our thread. Now, just to make sure that these wings stay splayed out, which makes them a little bit more visible from the underside, you just kind of pull them apart a little bit. And if you have a little bit of hackle in there, you can just come in, snip out your excess, and just place a drop of head cement in there, and those wings will stay permanently split for you. And this is where we have the parachute winger. Something a little more realistic compared to most of the parachute patterns that are available.